Okay, it's 2 o'clock GMT, so I think I'll kick this off. So welcome everybody. Thank you for so many of you joining us today for our very hopefully exciting webinar to talk to you more about the new Evo eye tracker. I'm delighted today to introduce my colleagues Rebecca and Matthias. I'll let them tell you a little bit more about themselves in a second. My name is Adam Waits from Smartbox. I work here in the UK as head of assessment. I think probably enough from me, other than to say a little bit of housekeeping. At the end of the webinar, we'll take questions and answers. So if you have any questions as we go along, if you could please add them to the chat. Paddy's going to monitor them and feed them into us at the end. We've hopefully left some time for questions. If we ramble on too much and we run out of time for enough questions, we will make sure we get some questions and answers to you thereafter. But without further ado, if I can hand over to Rebecca and Matthias to do some to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi there, everyone. My name's Rebecca. I am a product manager in the hardware team here at Smartbox. And for the last couple of months, I have been focusing on Evo and eye tracking and developing eye tracking at Smartbox. I'll hand over to Matthias.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Matthias. I'm originally the founder of Gaze First, the company that developed the technology behind Evo. And I'm now head of eye tracking at Smartbox.
So we're all here today and we are super excited to introduce Evo. I just want to say again, thank you for joining us. I learned today that it is Blue Monday. So for those of you who are feeling slightly sad today, there is a valid reason. And hopefully we can cheer those who are feeling slightly sad up by introducing some exciting news. We are, over the next hour-ish, going to be introducing and talking about our new eye tracker at Smartbox, which is named Evo. And this is really exciting. It's a massive step forward for us at Smartbox because this has been created in partnership with Matthias. It is now our new in-house eye tracker. And that's the first time that, we have this technology in-house at Smartbox. So really huge news, really exciting for us, and we can't wait to tell you more about it. Evo has been developed and made and is ready to use with our flagship devices. So for those of you who are familiar with our GridPad range, Evo works with GridPad 13 and GridPad 16. And it's been developed for anyone who needs high-performing eye gaze access on Windows and also needs full integration with Grid 3, the communication software that we have developed at Smartbox. So this will be joining our range of eye trackers that we already offer at Smartbox. And the idea here is that we'll give people more choice, more opportunity to find something that works for them access-wise and eye tracker-wise.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. So this slide is actually about the eye tracking journey at Smartbox. As I mentioned before, Gaze First, the company that originally created the technology, joined Smartbox last year. And we are already known for, some of you might have heard of it, the intuitive eye tracker that is also very well known in the AAC community. And I'm now running a dedicated eye gaze team inside Smartbox. And what we're doing is we're developing the technology behind Evo. I'm going to talk a bit about that later as well. But in general, our goal is simple. What we do is we're building eye gaze access for AAC users. And we want to build the best possible experience for people who rely on eye tracking every day, and our focus is really on AAC users. And continue.
Well, you finished, Matthias, or should we move on to this slide?
Yeah, sure. No worries. Go ahead.
Okay, didn't want to cut you off. So this is a slide on kind of product highlights and why someone might choose or might consider trying Evo as an eye tracker and as an access method. The first is that Evo is powered by machine learning, so it uses machine learning technology. A lot of you probably on this call and in general have heard a lot about AI and AI being used in all sorts of ways. Machine learning is a subset of AI, which has actually been around for a while. And this camera uses machine learning, which Matthias will explain a little bit more about in subsequent slides because he is the expert. So this camera has been trained on lots of data, and it does really well through this training at then predicting someone's gaze point and improving gaze accuracy or predicting gaze point accuracy, particularly in situations that it hasn't seen before. So it's almost like it's learned all of this context, learned from all of this data that it's been trained on using individuals' eyes. So then when it sees a new individual's eyes, it's really good at picking that up and being really accurate. So that's a really exciting kind of piece of technology that this camera incorporates to optimize for eye gaze accuracy. Another really nice thing is that all of this kind of machine learning and processing happens on the eye tracker itself. And the benefit of that is that we are not using the grid pad or the device processing power to do all of the eye gaze stuff. So what that means is it frees up a lot of resources on the device itself. It's not slowing down the device because it's doing all of the processing almost on its own mini computer within the eye tracker. So again, that is a real advantage of Evo. We've also seen that the Evo tracker has a really strong one-point calibration. We got a lot of feedback when we were taking Evo out into the field and doing user testing. Evo actually also offers a 0-point calibration. So both the 0-point calibration and the 1-point calibration are really good at getting people quick started using eye tracking, particularly those who might be a bit less experienced with eye gaze and eye tracking, and is good for things like gameplay and more low cell or low count grid sets, low cell grid sets. As mentioned, we have built Evo for Grid 3, so it works seamlessly and has been fully integrated with our Grid 3 software, and we'll show some demos on that later, as well as being fully integrated with our hardware. So again, for those of you who might be familiar with our eye tracking hardware, you can actually see on this image in the right corner, we have incorporated the eye tracker into our grid pad eye tracker enclosure. And what that means is it's really nice, plug and play. For those of you who need, you can take it off, put it on, you can screw it on if you need it kind of attached permanently. But for those who might be plugging and playing, swapping cameras in and out, this has been made really easy through the design and through building it into our existing grid pad enclosure, which is nice. And finally, this has been created by the team at Smartbox, now headed up by Matthias with the eye tracking division. So that means that we can really quickly react to any feedback. We can speak directly to the people using this, to our customers, caregivers, clinicians using Evo, and make sure that we're constantly improving and really have a laser focus on our AAC users, that we're getting the feedback from them and making sure that we're optimizing, developing this camera for the AAC community.
Thank you, Rebecca. So one of the questions that I hear a lot, of course, is how does all this machine learning technology work? So as Rebecca already said, machine learning is a subset of AI. And what we're doing here is, you can see that quite well on the right side. You can see some pictures from irises and eye images that we collect. We're training a neural network to identify patterns and predict where someone is looking and where all these features like the pupil are located. So if you look here on these images, there are different eyes under different conditions. Some people wearing glasses, some of these images are even artificially generated. And we are collecting a large amount of these data and building a data set to train our neural network. And the training doesn't happen on the device. So what we're doing is we're doing this on very large servers and workstations. And every time we have a new model, we test that with a lot of different tests and users, and then incorporate that into the Evo firmware. And with this approach, we can actually predict where someone is looking, even without having data from these people, because the data set behind all of this is so large that it has all these different eyes, and we can then generalize. And this is also very useful for situations where you have very difficult conditions, like eyes are covered, or someone is wearing glasses, or some person that might have very unique, specific eyes. And we have some Q&A here about data and internet access. So another question that is asked a lot of times, of course, is if Evo will access any data. And I can assure you all the processing happens on the device itself. We have actually a chip inside that device that does all that neural network processing, and data never leaves Evo. So everything is really processed on that small chip inside that device. And the only time that we would collect data is if someone voluntarily would opt in to give us some data samples. And if we collect these data, even though samples are anonymous, since we don't create a full image recording, we just take very small images from the eye region. They are actually grayscale and low resolution. So in our pool of all these images, we cannot even identify a specific person. We just need that to improve the tracking. And the other question that I also get a lot of is if Evo does work offline, and the answer here is yes. Since we do all that processing on the chip, on the device, we can always, in every condition, if you're online or not, we can always have the best eye tracking experience, and we don't need any kind of internet. The only exception would be if you want to update the firmware, that would require internet access, and you would download and update it, but we have a short video of that process later as well.
Great. One thing that I'd like to reiterate that Matthias said, because we do get a lot of questions from people around this, is that when someone is using Evo, we're not collecting data from them to optimize the model, what we call in real time. So it's not self-optimizing based on someone's usage. And what that means, so what we actually do with Evo is we've taken all of this data, trained a model, and that model then gets loaded onto the camera. That algorithm gets loaded onto the camera for the eye tracking. And that model will have gone through really, really thorough processes of testing, of making sure it's accurate. We do a whole bunch of testing internally at Smartbox before we release a model. And that makes sure that we're not seeing any kind of performance degradation or anything. So sometimes people kind of ask about that, like, does the model update by itself as someone's using it? The answer is no. If there's any questions on that, yeah, but pop them in the chat and we'll come back to that at the end, because that can be a bit of a confusing point. Okay, so at Smartbox, we really take a user-centric or a user-centered approach during our research and development. This is a really nice picture of one of our user testers who was testing Evo for us really thoroughly, and one of our Smartboxers. I love this picture. So we actually tested the eye tracker Evo back in February. So this was February last year, February 2026. No, that's wrong, 2025. Need to remember what year I'm in. And this was before the two companies came together. So this was before Smartbox and Gaze First actually partnered up. And we tested with, I would say, about 6-7 users, and we were really, really impressed with what it was then called the iTuitive camera. And through this testing, that kind of spurred the decision for the partnership in the first place, and also to make the decision to kind of fully integrate iTuitive or the Evo camera into Grid 3 and also into our hardware and the grid pad enclosure. And it was then at this point, so after those integrations, we went out for longer term user testing. And these were like 2 or 3 week sprints, or two or 3 week stints, sorry, where we went out to different users and they really put the eye tracker through its paces. So we got loads and loads of feedback from these sessions. On things from the grid integration to the settings that we were offering, to the tracker performance, to the calibration. So following that, we made a lot of changes just around how things were integrated and what settings we were offering, and things like the calibration accuracy and the speed and animations and all of that. Things around the positioning guide, and also having options to do things like increase the sampling rate. So I just wanted to highlight that, yeah, the integrations really took on a lot of user feedback that we were seeing over last year, going through these multiple rounds of user testing. And I wanted to share a quote on the next slide, which was actually from Sam. So this was one of our long-term user testers. And he was saying, so he actually took his Evo camera as far as the Welsh coast. And was on the beach testing Evo with his GridPad 13. And he said, for the first time, I was able to communicate freely and effectively outdoors, and this was difficult before.
Thank you, Rebecca. So here we have some of the features or technical things that I also like to mention about Evo. So one of them is the sampling rate. We actually heard that before. So with Evo, you have the option to choose between 30 and 60 frames sampling rate. What does that mean? So that means how many pictures per second we take of a user and that user's eyes. You don't actually need 60 frames, of course. If you would like, you can select that. But with the quality that we already get from 30 frames per second, we have some benefits why you would choose that. One of them is that if you run it on 30 frames per second, you can actually save some battery lifetime, since we don't need to take that many pictures, don't need to process them, and get even some longer battery lifetime. On the other hand, if you would move a lot, it might be beneficial to have a higher sampling rate so that you even get more data sampled. Another thing is the operating distance. So we would recommend using Evo at 50 to 75 centimeters. This is the recommended operating distance. Of course, you could use it a bit further away or a bit closer, but make sure that if you test, that if you use the positioning guide, that you position yourself in that distance. But we will have a video, I think, on this as well. Another thing is the accuracy. So after a good calibration, you typically can expect an accuracy of 0.4 to 0.8 degrees. 0.4 is the best. A bit inside the track box that can get a bit less, something around 0.8 degree. But that, of course, is also something individual. And another thing is the technology. So what we're using is dark pupil tracking. And that means we have some infrared lights that actually flash every time we take a picture of that user, and they will make the pupil appear as a dark circle that we then track.
Amazing. So we now have some grid demos. We weren't, or I wasn't brave enough to do these live, so they are pre-recorded. I realised in hindsight that I recorded them quite quickly. So Adam, my glamorous assistant, is going to be pausing the video, so hopefully I can talk around the settings.
Try and get
So without
people
further ado,
synced with you. Yeah. Okay.
I think we'll go on to the first video. Okay. So for those of you who are familiar with Grid, you'll be very used to seeing Grid Explorer. And if you go into the menu settings, at the top underneath kind of the user profile, you'll see access. And within here, we have the eye gaze settings. And if you have connected a Evo camera, when you click into the camera settings at the top, you actually should see Evo already loads as default. But if it hasn't done that, or you're switching cameras around, you might need to go into here and manually select the Evo camera yourself. And then also within these camera settings, we've integrated things like advanced options. So you can choose to track with both eyes, choose to track with a single eye, depending on a user's preferences. We also have settings in here like smoothing. And then Matthias mentioned earlier the sampling rate. So this is a new setting for those of you who are used to seeing Grid. You may not have seen this before because we only have this with Evo. But this means that you can choose either 30 or 60 hertz. So this is frames a second. And because it is a new setting, we do have a bit of a description on here why someone might choose 30 or 60. And as the recommended option. Sorry, Adam, if we could just pause. Thank you. We put 30 as the recommended because that is the most optimized. Oh, is the screen actually shared? Is everyone seeing this video?
Yeah, I'm seeing it,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
I'm not sure. We're all the presenters. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry, I'll
Okay,
continue.
good.
I
Yeah,
just
thank
worried
you.
then that we weren't actually sharing the video. Cool. So the sampling rate, so 30 we have recommended, and that recommendation is because it's suitable for most eye tracking requirements. And at 30 frames a second, because we're using slightly less processing power, it actually optimizes the battery life. So you get better battery life when you select 30 frames a second over 60. However, some people might find 60 a bit better in terms of recovery because the sampling rate is quicker. So again, it does depend on an individual user, but 60 frames a second, particularly if someone has a lot of head movement or is noticing that the recovery rate isn't quite quick enough for their need, that might be why you might up the sampling rate to 60. Okay. I think we can continue because I think this video had a couple of more settings to talk through.
Video, or do you want to do the first one again, Rebecca?
Oh, was that the end of the video?
That was the end of the video.
Amazing.
I
Okay,
think,
covered
yeah,
everything that we want to there.
you did, yeah.
So
Okay, I'll kick this one
if we go on to the second demo, this is going to go into some of the calibration settings. So here under calibration, you can actually choose how many targets you would like. So again, this is quite similar to some of our other eye trackers. You can select 1, 5, 9-point calibration. This does go up to 13 targets. Those would be for larger screen sizes, or within here, you can also select 0 targets. And what 0 targets does, if we just pause for 1 sec before it jumps on, is 0 targets will load like an average eye model. So it's almost like a default eye model. That is useful if someone just needs to get really quickly started with eye tracking. Maybe if they're a bit less experienced and haven't quite worked up to a 1-point or a 5-point calibration yet. That is obviously not going to be as accurate as a 9-point calibration, for example. But that is good for getting really quickly started and probably for quite low cell counts or a bit of gameplay, kind of cause and effect stuff. Also within this calibration, I think settings, you can change things like the speed, the target style, you can change the background color. We do have some nice kind of target styles in here, depending on who is using this, like different animations. And I think you can change it to the bird and the cat. If we come out of here, I'm actually so this is me doing a 5-point calibration, which we can play. And what I want to show is some of the animations. So if the dot is shrinking, that means that we're collecting data for that calibration target. And actually on this last point, I purposefully didn't look at that calibration point because I wanted to show that we do show some scoring based on how well we have been able to calibrate and how well we've been able to fit an eye model to those calibration points. So because I was not looking at the screen on that last point, you can see it hasn't been able to fit an eye model to this calibration, and it's just given a score of 0 because it said that this doesn't make sense. From here, if that happens, you can improve the calibration, and that will just redo that one point that has come up red. So here you can see me redoing that, and you can see then because I was looking in the correct place for that last point, that has gone up to green, and that has been able to fit a proper eye model for that calibration. We've also integrated a positioning guide. And this positioning guide shows some really nice information that helps get a user positioned in the best place. Tools along the top, you can change either from face to eyes to video. That again just helps with, depending on kind of, a caregiver or user's preference, helps get the positioning right. Video in particular, if someone is wearing glasses, is quite good at seeing whether there's any reflection or any any interference with someone's glasses to try and get that positioning of using eye gaze correct. We also have track status, so things like distance, eye visibility, some information on a user's last calibration. So all of this can be found within the positioning guide, as well as this distance bar along the bottom, along the side. And the distance bar, will show whether you're too close. As Matthias mentioned earlier, the optimal kind of operating distance of Evo is between 50 and 75, which actually is a bit closer than some other eye trackers that you might be used to. Be prepared or be ready to try positioning a little bit closer with this one as well. Great. And the final video just shows a couple of extra settings. Can everyone hear me properly? Yeah. Okay. So if we go into settings and activation, this just shows a couple of extra activation and highlight settings. So you can change how a cell is activated, you can change the colors, the progress bar, kind of the animation that shows as someone is selecting something. This defaults to kind of a circular progress bar, but everyone has different preferences on this. Some people kind of prefer the shrinking dot because that brings someone eye in. Kind of less or more experienced people may choose their activation settings in terms of time up and down. So all of that can kind of be done from this screen, as well as changing any colors and highlight settings and things like repeat activations. If we continue, we've also got things like blink to click to activate. Changing the color. Having the eye gaze dot on or off. And then here are some computer control settings as well. So this just changes kind of how much you zoom, and again, coloring as well. So here what I'm doing is I'm actually going to just show how quick a 1-point calibration is. I think you pause the video, Adam. So literally 1-point calibration done in a couple of seconds, really good. And then this is just showing for me how accurate a 1-point calibration has been. So this is now me using my eyes to select things on screen. And I haven't been particularly creative. I've just gone into keyboard in Supercore. I'm typing out hello. But I can do all of this with a 1-point calibration, so really accurate. And the final thing demo-wise is just to show at the top, we have added in, so this is really easy now to identify if you need a software or a firmware update. So if one is available to you, we have these icons that show in the top right in orange, and you can do that directly within Grid. So you can just click on that. You can install your most recent firmware or software update just directly from Grid. And that takes a couple of seconds, and yeah, you're on the most recent version. So just wanted to show like how easy that is, how easy it is to keep it all updated, and you don't need any additional software or any additional drivers to install on your device. That all works from within Grid. Great. Okay, slightly flustered going through those at
That's not
double
stressful
speed.
at all, trying to stay with you there, Rebecca, but we managed it. Okay, I think most people got the idea. I
You did
did
a great
notice
job, Adam.
I think one or two people, there may have been some breaking up the sound halfway through, but I think the majority of what you said was absolutely fine.
If there was any breaking up of sound or anything that wasn't clear or didn't come across clear, please put it in the Q&A. Don't worry about, we're very happy to go over things again. So just whack that in the Q&A and we'll come onto it at the end and hopefully, yeah, make that more clear if it wasn't. Great. So looking ahead, at Smartbox, we're always striving, always continuing to provide future updates, to provide new features, to really focus and listen to feedback from our AAC users, and make sure that we're kind of continuing to evolve, continuing to optimize. That's one of the reasons why you should always check if there is a software or firmware update available to you, because we are always, iterating, improving. So it's really important to be as up to date as possible. But some of the things that we're looking at in the future for Evo, so some of the things coming up, one is that we want to continue developing our machine learning and our algorithms as we get more data. So this is something that, now it's all in-house at Smartbox with the eye gaze division. This is something that we're really going to be optimizing, improving the performance on, making sure that our accuracy and precision with eye tracking continues to be as good as it can be. We also heard quite a lot from users during user testing that things like computer control and having a separate computer control is really important. So this is definitely one of the things that we want to look at in the future, and kind of act on this feedback to make sure that we're optimizing computer control for our AAC users as well. But importantly, feedback always helps us improve. So let us know your feedback if you do have any, either through the support teams or if you've got contacts at Smartbox and you're using Evo, we're more than happy to gather that feedback and make sure that we're optimizing as best we can be.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So I'm just going to wrap up with a final slide here, really just a reminder for folks who perhaps know Smartbox well, perhaps you're coming to it the first time, but beyond Grid, where might you go for developing eye gaze skills, or indeed looking at literacy and reading with people who are using eye gaze or alternative access methods? And just a reminder around the Look family of software. So by that I mean Look to Read, Look to Learn with sounds, and more recently Look Lab. So just thinking about how we use that here within Smartbox, and when we're out visiting users or working in schools and so on, many of you will have come across Look to Learn and look Scenes and Sounds, the add-on to Look to Learn, just in terms of integrating that with Grid, so launching it from Grid, and that of course will work seamlessly as with our other cameras with Grid. So you can launch it from Grid, use the activity either with a communication support partner or independently. In particular on that, I'm going to come to Look Lab in a second. But if you're using, if you're just starting out, perhaps at an early stage with eye gaze, you're probably looking at activities within Look to Learn where you can do some very early cause and effect activities, some choice making activities, practice targeting cells and so on. but I'm always looking to introduce AAC or include AAC in commenting around the activities that we're using there. More recently, Look Lab came out a couple of years ago, and that's a really great place to go if you're talking about developing navigation skills or looking at a wider range of perhaps slightly more higher level activities, games, as well as leisure activities, always integrating back to Grid. So again, with that activity, you can go to Grid, you can launch the Look to Learn companion, and Evo will work in native control. By that I mean it just works seamlessly. It launches the program. You don't have to think about setting up any other cells to control any elements of how Evo is working and interacting with Look Lab. And you can skip back and forwards between your activity, whether that be a splatting game or a puzzle game or a colouring or a musical activity, back into your communication software, whatever that might look like, whether it's the companion grid, which is a relatively simple 12 to 20 cell grid, just begin to practice core vocabulary, or whether you're using text-based AAC or indeed a full robust core vocabulary. So if you haven't tried those before, and I come back, just one more I come back to is Look to Read. That's been around for a few years now, but it's a great selection of reading books that you can use with eye gaze or other access methods, in fact, again, integrating that with communication access as well. All of those, if you aren't familiar with them, go onto our website, look for the link, you could download them and try them. Some last forever, but with limited access to certain activities. Some will last for a certain length of time. But again, go and have a look. They're a great way to get started with practicing skills. And certainly if you're using something like Look Lab, you could really build up some quite extensive, comprehensive and capable eye gaze skills around using some of those activities. And on that note, I'm just going to move to the last slide and see if we can pick up some questions that we might have had in the chat. I hope that was interesting. It's always nice, I think, when we hear from the absolute experts and the developers. So just to reiterate, Rebecca's product manager has been leading on this area. Matthias is the person who developed this camera the first time. And what's exciting for us is I saw a question there about the merging of potentially of Lumini and Evo. Well, the reality is that it's great to have other manufacturers using their cameras. Who knows, those manufacturers evolve, develop, innovate. Well, one of the things that's delighting us here at Smartbox, working with Matthias and Gaze First, is that we're all focused on AAC and focused on that direction of travel and innovating in that area. So when I saw questions there about things like glasses and strabismus and squints and nystagmus, those are all sorts of things that we're going to be able to dig deeper into over time. We're just beginning. But Paddy, I know you've been monitoring some of the questions. Should we pick some of those up now?
Yes, I have a few. I'm just going to start from the first one. That says, how does it affect the battery? And I feel that might need a bit more context.
Yeah. So how does the Evo camera impact battery life? And I'm going to make an assumption here. If we talk about, let's say, our base point can be a grid pad, for the sake of argument, I guess. So is this one for you, Rebecca?
Yeah. So, I mean, figuring out battery life isn't an exact science. We were speaking about battery life comparing 30 frames a second and 60 frames a second. We always strive to have over 8 hours battery life with eye gaze. I can't remember off the top of my head what the battery life is grid pad alone. I think we say, Adam, do you know, 10 hours?
Well, I probably should know off the top of my head, Rebecca. So no, that's fine. Yeah, we would say 10 hours for grid pad without eye gaze.
And with eye gaze, we strive for 8 hours. What we were seeing when we were comparing battery life between 30 frames a second and 60 was roughly we were getting about an hour's additional battery life on the 30 frames a second, so with less processing. So yeah, a kind of trivial amount of extra battery life, which was good, and was one of the kind of motivations for setting 30 frames a second as our default setting.
And it's probably fair to say, Rebecca, feel free to correct me, but you might say, for example, it's possibly less, certainly on 30 frames a second, consuming less power if you were to compare all the different eye gaze cameras than say Lumini, which is probably consuming a little more battery life, I would hazard a guess. So yeah.
So move to the next question. How does Evo with Grid 3 compare to Intuitive? Why did
Shall I take this one? So in terms of settings, they are pretty identical. So in terms of calibration settings, in terms of being able to change the frame rate, in terms of being able to change kind of speed of calibration, the number of targets in calibration, the settings are very similar between Intuitive and Grid. The UI, so the user interface, looks quite different. Obviously, Intuitive is more around kind of adjusting your camera settings rather than having communication software. The communication software and your grid sets and your symbol communication, your text communication, that's all within Grid 3. So I think maybe a good way to view it is that Intuitive has been developed and designed to adjust things like calibration settings, camera settings. Grid 3 is the communication software, but within that, you can also adjust all of the calibration settings, highlight, activation settings within Grid 3 as well.
But am I right to
Matthias,
say,
not sure if...
Rebecca, if you were to plug in an Intuitive camera, you should get quite a similar experience in Grid 3, whether you're using Evo or Intuitive, because fundamentally it's the same technology behind the cameras. Sorry.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we had this discussion,
That
didn't we,
is...
Matthias? And I'm not going to stop calling it a camera. This one's a tracker because it's onboard processing. There we are. I knew I'd do it. It's a tracker. Whereas our Lumini cameras and Vida cameras, we would regard as cameras. Okay. There we go.
Okay,
Right.
next question. Are we happy to go to the next question?
Yeah, please.
Cool. How does it work with different lights, e.g., darker rooms, sunlight, bright lights? How would it work if person driving wheelchair move between different light rooms and outside?
Rebecca?
So I can answer
Or
that
Matthias, go
question.
Matthias. Sorry, yeah.
Sure. So since the tracking works a bit different in Evo with the machine learning approach, it should actually work better in different light conditions. So we also tested Evo outside, of course, and also under different light settings in different environments, and it works quite well, I would say. The only thing to be aware of is that if the sunlight would directly shine inside the eye tracker, like say it's behind you and it would directly shine inside the eye tracker camera, that would be sometimes difficult because that is a physical limitation, as the sun is emitting a lot of infrared light. That is basically as if you look into the sun, it's blinding. So that might not work as well.
And the reality probably is then, Matthias, that you're probably struggling to see your screen of
That
your
is also true.
display.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is useful sometimes is probably also just wearing a hat outside.
Yeah.
That helps a lot already.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question. Can you explain in more detail how pictures of eyes actually improve eye gaze accuracy?
So I take that as well. Since we are building a machine learning model for detecting eyes and detecting where someone looks, we need as many different eye pictures as possible because every person has unique eyes and they all look a bit different, they all move a bit different. And the more we get these images, the more we can build a generalized model of how different eyes look and how they behave. So collecting these data will help us to make better predictions on where someone is looking.
Awesome. Next question. What are the differences comparing Evo to Lumini?
So from within Grid, I mean, they're two entirely different eye trackers. From within Grid and the Grid settings, they actually look very similar because you can adjust, you can edit the same things in terms of the positioning guide. All of that is pretty much identical between Evo and Lumini within Grid. In terms of the hardware, though, they are very different eye trackers. The technology that they use is very different. So it's, yeah, I mean, in terms of the differences comparing, the technology is just different, and one might work better for one person in one use case, one might,
I'm
it's
afraid
very
that
kind of
was
user
going to be
specific.
that was going to be my addition as well, Rebecca, which is I'm afraid there's no quick, easy, yes, it'll work with this group better than that group. I think you're going to have to be, as with a lot of eye gaze cameras, try it and see and compare. You can never absolutely guarantee that one track is going to work for one person and not another. It's a case of trying it. I mean, you've talked a little about the technology being different. I think the data draw on Evo is less than on Lumini, so it's not working as hard because of that onboard processing element. But one other thing I would say that's different about them is just a subtle difference is the Lumini is the only camera with a 4-point calibration compared. So it's just those very subtle differences just in terms of how many calibration points that you can do. But in my experience of using them, for example, and Mateus touched on this, Evo has a strong 1-point calibration. I don't think Lumini has a particularly one strong point calibration, but it has an excellent 4-point calibration. So there are those little differences between the two. But other than that, it's a case of try it.
All right, next question.
Also,
is there a set? Oh, sorry.
Just one thing to add from, because I remembered from a hardware perspective, Lumini actually has three infrared sensors. Evo has one on each side. So that's quite a visible thing, especially if you can see the infrared sensors from within the hardware, within the camera. Again, it's just different camera, works slightly differently.
Yeah, and again, there's a couple of additional settings on Lumini, or the differing settings. I'm thinking about like anti-reflection modes and anti-infrared modes that there are on Lumini, which is about the amount of infrared that's been emitted at any one time on a Lumini camera.
Our next question. Is there a certain angle the device must be in front of the eyes to be working properly?
So within the grid pad enclosure, the camera is mounted at a certain angle. So it's mounted at 20 degrees. And that's because the camera is under the grid pad device. So it needs to be angled slightly up to kind of capture a person who is sat in front of a grid pad within the track box. So all of that has kind of already been considered with the nature of like the plug and play enclosure into the bottom of the grid pad. That mounting has already been set up. With positioning, I mean, you'll have to do your individual positioning anyway to get that person kind of in the center of the track box in a good position, making sure there's no reflections or anything that could interfere with the tracking. So yes, the device is already mounted within the enclosure, but you will need to kind of do your own positioning to make sure that that user is in the appropriate position.
Okay, next question. Is Evo better for CVI glasses users?
I'm gonna pick up on that first, and feel free to join in. I'd say neither better or worse. I think it's an assessment thing. I think you're gonna have to just try and see. I don't know, Mateus, if you have a view on. Obviously, we've done lots of testing around glasses wearers. There's a whole cohort of users in the ASC community that have less typical eye gaze presentations. It's about trying and seeing, but perhaps Mateus, you have anything to add?
I would say the same. So because the tracking technology works a bit different than other eye trackers, it should work better with glasses, but still I would recommend trying that out and see how that works for you individually.
I think, as with other cameras, not all cameras have the same track status. I think the video feed is incredibly useful when you're working with someone who's wearing glasses or perhaps is wearing a mask, just in terms of identifying and then preventing or eliminating extra glare points.
Okay. Are we happy to go to the next question?
Yes, thank you, Paddy.
Cool. Is Intuitive still being developed as an external eye gaze camera system? Does it share the same development gains of Evo?
Yes, so Intuitive is still developed as a standalone eye tracker and is also being sold through different partners in different regions. And since the technology is the same and yeah, everything behind that as well, the performance upgrades that we integrate into Evo in terms of software updates will also get delivered to Intuitive. One of the main things maybe to note here is that Evo is a medical device designed for GridPad, and Intuitive as a standalone device is not a medical device. It is just bring your own device and doesn't have any medical certification.
Awesome. Next question. Can you show how 0-point calibration works? I feel that might have been covered in one of the videos though. Rebecca?
I don't think we specifically showed how 0-point calibration works. I also don't have a device here with me, so I can't show, but I can explain. So within the calibration settings, you can select 0-point calibration. In theory, it's not really a calibration because it's not displaying any points to look at. What it's doing is loading or preloading an existing average eye model, we call it. So this is like taking trained data from lots of different people, loading an average eye model, and then using that rather than picking up on someone's calibration, like individual calibration points. But that can be good enough to get someone started. But it's like putting yourself down in front of, yeah, kind of an average model. So it might not be really, really accurate to that individual. But as I say, good to get someone started really quickly. And can be accurate enough for low count grid sets or kind of initial gameplay of starting cause and effect games.
Okay, next question. Are the calibration menus able to be manipulated or navigated by the user to adjust their own settings using their Blink's navigated method of choice?
Yeah, so it's kind of a yes and no answer. So at the moment, through Grid, if you go into the menu, that is actually not used or not eye gaze accessible. However, you can on your grid sets load a toolkit, and I can't remember exactly what grid sets that's in. I can find that out and we can share that information after. And through there, someone can adjust their eye gaze settings. They can bring up, for example, a positioning guide. They can also program on the smart buttons. If you do have a grid pad, on the smart buttons, you can program those to do things like bring up a positioning guide. So all of that is eye gaze accessible. And then, yeah, kind of within your toolkit, there are things like being able to, yeah, look at your distance, look at your, you can start a calibration from there. You can improve your calibration from there. You can have a look at things like your eye visibility. So yeah, there is an eye gaze accessible toolkit.
Change your dwell time, etc. But not everything, not every last detail. So you're right. You started by saying it's a yes and no answer, and I agree with you entirely. Partially, you can.
Okay, next question. Will this also make sense for people who are using their hands to carry the tablet but struggle with fine motor skills, which makes grid difficult?
I guess it could do. Absolutely. It will depend on the disability, but you might be using this type of technology either with a grid pad. If you're carrying it, you're more likely to be using a lighter weight laptop or tablet, and then you'd be looking at something like intuitive in that way. And you could be using eye gaze for computer control, with either dwell, blink, or switch.
Any thoughts of integrating the strength of Lumini and Evil together?
Again, I think I touched on that earlier, which was really to say that Evo with Mateus is all part of the Smartbox family, and we're in control of that development. When we're working with something like Lumini or Vida, those are other manufacturers developing those cameras. We do the integration with Grid. We have less control. In some way, that's a positive because people are more likely to innovate when they're going in slightly different directions. So I don't think they won't merge in any way. We'll keep those different streams. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Rebecca, or product manager.
No, I think you covered it. Thanks.
Oh, next question. What are some profiles of eye gaze users who may have struggled previously with other eye trackers who may have more success with Evo?
Okay. So, Evo, is there a proportion, a cohort of the population who might do better with Evo than with other trackers that they may have previously tried? Any thoughts on that, Rebecca? I'd be probably saying I'd be trying more than one camera anyway.
Yeah, I think it always is very individual specific. It's difficult to say that one camera is going to be better for a certain cohort. What I can comment on is we did a bunch of user testing, and we did see some really positive results, for example, with someone who had a strabismus. So with their existing setup without Evo, they were using single eye tracking, and that was working well for them. They actually used and then kind of tested Evo, and rather than using single eye tracking,
I think
just through playing.
We lost you for a moment.
Just through playing. Oh no. When did I cut out?
No, we lost you for 2 seconds. Carry on.
Okay. So just through kind of playing with their settings with Evo, they were able to find a setting and a configuration that worked really well with their strabismus. Yeah, things like this, it's always kind of down to the tailoring and personalization to really like fine tune that to an individual. And that does just come with experimentation.
Yeah, great. Paddy, we've got 3 minutes left, so I'm going to cherry pick a couple of questions that I'm just seeing in the chat. There's a question here. There's a question here. Again, this might be either Rebecca or Mateus. Is there computer control from VAS? Is there computer control similar to Vida, or will one come in the future?
Yeah, this is a great question. So actually with Evo at the moment, it works with Windows, so Microsoft Eye Control. And that is something that comes default with Windows devices. You can find that from the settings menu or the start menu. Go into Eye Control, and Evo is compatible with Windows Eye Control at the moment. That obviously is not a Smartbox developed product. That's a Windows developed product. So what we want to do at Smartbox, because we know that this is really important to especially our power users, is develop out and optimize our own Smartbox computer control. But that is something that will come in the future.
Great. Quick question, quick answer. I can probably do pick this. Are you able to use eye gaze features in conjunction with switch scanning features? And the answer to that, yes, potentially you could. You could either use switch scanning alongside Grid, but more likely you might be using an eye gaze camera like the Evo with a switch to select. But if you need to, for any reason, to combine those two selection methods, switch scanning and eye gaze, you can turn them both on in Grid and use them that way. Yeah, you can. Right, probably we're about to the last one. When can we expect a standalone version like Vida with IntelliGaze, please, and USB version?
Yes, is that one for you?
So I would say the iTuitive is somehow the standalone version of Evo. It is not medically certified as mentioned before, but the technology is the same, and you could use that with USB on any type of computer. So I would say that is comparable standalone version.
Okay. Finally, just comment on one last question, then we'll draw it to a close. I think what we'll do after this, I think Paddy, we'll look through the rest of the questions, and if there's any that outstanding ones that we haven't answered, we'll feed them out to the group that have attended.
Absolutely.
The list. The last one I just have here, because I think we can clear it up quite quickly. Someone's feeling a little lost as to what the difference between a camera and a tracker. And I'll see if I've got this, Mateus, and then you could pick me up and see if I'm right. Fundamentally, Evo uses sensors in theory rather than a camera and is therefore a tracker. And then indicative of that is the onboard processing that happens on Evo. Is that a fair one-line description, Mateus, or is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, that's correct. Like everything gets done on the device itself. So it basically gives you coordinates where someone is looking, where the other devices are really cameras that take pictures, transfer that picture on the grid pad or computer, and then the tracking happens on that device.
Yeah.
But Evo does everything itself.
Okay. And Mateus, because I like this question, I'm going to ask this last one, which is, we were talking about sunlight, and you mentioned perhaps wearing a hat would be helpful. So Sam's asked, a hat wouldn't stop the sunlight going through the camera though, right? Does the camera need a hat?
Yeah, sorry, that was just an addition to that part that you might not be able to see your grid screen. So if you're really blinded by the sunlight, it might just be more comfortable for you as a user. And the other thing is that your pupils get dilated quite easily with direct sunlight, so they might be very small. So wearing a hat would probably help a bit with tracking accuracy as well, but it is not necessarily required. And we also did tests outdoors with people not wearing any kind of hat.
But we will be adding an eye tracker hat onto the roadmap to develop.
Interesting. I think there's just one here that I feel we should also quickly give a feedback on. The one that said, is it available for trialing? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
You can.
I was going to pick up on that, Paddy, just say yes. Thank you for listening, and it's available now. So either if you want to ask to purchase or for trial, you can contact Smartbox in the normal way. Both are available to try with your AAC device. There was one other question that came through, Mateus. Someone asked whether this was available to use with other AAC software. I think the answer is it's integrated with GRI, but not necessarily integrated with other AAC software packages. Anything about Windows? There's nothing there about Windows Eye Control enabling you, therefore, to use it with other trackers, is there?
No,
No.
It's
so it's with Grid.
Yeah.
Grid. Okay.
Especially
Brilliant.
that the Evo module is designed to snap into the grid pad, and it would come naturally pre-installed on that device.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. I hope that was helpful. As we just to reiterate, it's available now. If you want to trial Evo, please get in touch and we'll be happy to try and help. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you. And we also appreciate your feedback. If you can scan the QR code and give us a feedback on the webinar, that would be very, very helpful. Do enjoy the rest of the day.